Hi. We are so thrilled to be here today. Lara and I couldn't be more excited to share with all of you our insights in revitalizing cross-product organizations. And actually, this talk originated from our real-world experiences working together. And we put it together because we really want to arm all of you with actionable insights for you to take back into your own organizations. So whether you're an engineer or a designer, a product manager, or an individual contributor, maybe you're a manager, maybe you're a lead, whatever your role is, we hope that we can share information that's relevant to all of you. And so first, it would be helpful for us to share a little bit about ourselves. So a little bit about me, I hail from the Bay Area. I actually have a computer science degree from Berkeley, and I started my career on the West Coast in Silicon Valley, first at Macromedia and then later at Adobe. And after 10 years, yes, you heard me right, 10 years at Adobe, which is an insane amount of time, I ended up wrapping up there to move to New York. And I ran product at a clean water nonprofit called Charity Water in New York. And it was a really amazing experience, and it was while I was at Charity Water that I got a call to join Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign as a product leader. So here's the tech team at Hillary for America. I joined this team when it was less than 10, 12 people, and here we are, about 90 plus, a few days before the election in 2016. And honestly, it's some of the best product managers, designers, engineers, user researchers that you could ever have the privilege to work with. Leading product on this team was absolutely amazing. I worked on a part of the broader product portfolio around fundraising, where we raised well over $1 billion through 3 million grassroots donors. Also worked on her website, hillaryclinton.com, and building a variety of bespoke digital products to help get her message out there about her policies. And it was really my time on Hillary for America where I fell back in love with building digital technology. It was so clear to me how it just takes really a few smart people with a well-defined problem area to make magic happen. After the campaign, I joined Kickstarter to run product and design there. And so here are some members of our amazing product team at Kickstarter. And I was really tasked with helping to innovate and accelerate the team's ability to ship at a high velocity. And this was also where I had the good fortune to meet Lara when she joined our leadership team as the VP of Engineering. So let me paint a little picture for you. For my first 4 months, I'll stop moving. For my first 4 months at Kickstarter, I did not have a vice president of engineering. And so I was effectively running all 3 teams: product management, design, and engineering. And we were hiring, but we just couldn't really find the right fit. And every board meeting, actually, I was asked by our board, hey, what do you need to be successful? And my response was always the same. I need a capable engineering leader to partner with me. And so when Lara walked into our office in June, it was kismet, and we knew that she was the right person to come join our team.
So we probably met when I came and visited the Clinton campaign office, but neither of us remember it. So in our wildest dreams, we probably high-fived each other and shared a donut, but it didn't happen. So before Kickstarter, I ran a product infrastructure organization at Etsy. I grew the team from 3 people on a performance team to a team of 35 folks that included multiple infrastructure, front-end infrastructure, design systems, and QA. I earned my management and organizational change stripes there, and I developed a love of creating healthy, high-functioning teams. So as we were wrapping up at Kickstarter, we had this moment of realization that we could take our love of growing and revitalizing product development orgs and share it with a ton of organizations and other companies. We know what works, and we want to bring that to more audiences, including all of y'all today. So product design and engineering organizations all have the same 3 core goals: positive team health, high velocity shipping, and strategic execution. We all want these things. When we show up at work every day, this is probably the foundation underlying your day-to-day work goals, right? Aiming for that healthy team dynamic and shipping quality stuff efficiently and strategically. But we often get in our way.
Boy, do we.
From ill-defined roles and responsibilities to toxic communication patterns to well-meaning but under-equipped managers. This is common, right? There isn't some organization out there that has never hit a speed bump, never developed a frustrating feedback loop, or totally had everything figured out from inception. So today we're going to cover 5 tactics that can drastically improve the health of your product organization. We're going to talk about how clearly defined roles and responsibilities will improve velocity and accountability. we're going to cover how it's essential for organizational buy-in and commitment to have living documents that cover your product development strategy and process. We'll walk through how to navigate those totally necessary but difficult conversations, and we're going to do it mindfully. And then we'll wrap up by talking about joining forces with your cross-departmental peers. Note here that though we're focusing on our experiences working with product, design, and engineering teams, all of these things will totally help revitalize any kind of organization.
Okay, so let's start with the first tactic, which is around how valuable it can be to clarify functional roles and both the individual and the shared responsibilities for those roles. So a clear understanding of functional roles and their required responsibilities is necessary for clear collaboration. Individuals need to understand what they are responsible for and how that slots in with the shared responsibilities across the broader organization. Really, without this, chaos and confusion is what ensues. I'm sure you've heard all of these phrases here, these quotes. They crop up in any number of situations. Maybe a product manager is not aware that bringing the quantitative data to justify a particular feature choice is their responsibility. Well, when the finger pointing starts later on, when the feature produces no real impact, they may say, well, that's not my job. Or maybe a designer and a product manager don't truly understand how they interface together. So they might both have spent individual countless hours defining the same customer pain points. And then they come back together, and then you might hear, wait, I already did that. Why did you do that? And the frustration of wasted time can build. Or maybe no one talks to the platform engineering team to let them know a new service needs to be stood up in production, or a release is coming that requires a shared library to be updated, and then the product launch is delayed. Well, you might hear, wait, who was supposed to do that? So these statements all arise from ambiguity, and they breed frustration and mistrust and bad habits. So in a nutshell, without role clarity, it may seem like nothing is happening with any sort of urgency. I consider that inertia. Or maybe it seems like too much is happening with too little impact, and I consider that chaos. Or the worst symptom, in my opinion, which is where folks feel checked out because no one feels empowered to actually do something. And that's ambivalence, and that sucks. So let's talk a little bit more about what kind of clarity is needed, and then the solutions that you and your teams can take home today to establish role clarity. Well, first we must better understand how product development works and the numerous people involved in each phase. So take a little trip with me. In this delicate dance of product development, each member of the product team has a unique and special role to play. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the common phases features go through during product development. You can kind of chunk this up however you want, but generally, product development sort of starts with the act of ideating and building technology to sort of frame the problem that you're trying to solve, and so that's the discovery phase. And then based on that problem definition, you'll ideate on the right solution during the design stage. And then you'll actually go ahead and build out that solution during the development stage, and then essentially prepare for shipping it to prime time by doing testing and then entering into the deployment phase. And finally, you'll hopefully see how your products are performing out in the wild, and based on how it's being used and what you're sort of observing, you'll figure out what to do next, and that's the post-deployment and iteration phase. So these boxes rinse and repeat the flow of product development. So there are a few things that actually make this really complicated. There are three kind of problems that come to mind. So the first complication is that these product development phases never, ever, ever operate in sort of a perfect sequence like this. In fact, phases overlap. Sometimes phases will be like stopped and then started again, or fully scrapped as you sort of make your way through and maybe ditch the idea. So basically, product development is the Wild West, right? It's both a mixture of the proactive and the reactive. And so to believe that each phase sort of neatly slides into the next is absolute folly. The second complication is that there's never just one functional role owning each phase at a time. So another way of phrasing this is that it's not really a relay race. There's no clean baton pass from product manager to designer and to engineer. So the idea that a PM wholly owns discovery, or that a designer wholly owns the design stage, or that engineering wholly owns development, this just isn't how it is. Teammates actually work together on all of these phases. And sure, some functional roles might take more of a lead during one of the phases, but to get it done and to do it well, partnership and pairing is integral. And then the third complication is that there are all these other roles on a product team. What about a strategist or a data scientist, or even distinctions between functional roles like an engineering manager or an engineering lead? Distinct and numerous roles within a product organization is very commonplace. clarifying the specific and shared responsibilities across these roles is a necessity. Otherwise, toes are going to be stepped on and frustrations will mount.
We know nothing about that.
So how can we actually clarify this? Well, Lara actually has a tried and true tactic that we've both utilized in a variety of organizations.
Y'all know what this is, right? This is my favorite tool in my management toolbox, the beautiful Venn diagram. So use this as a framework for functional teams to list out folks' unique and shared responsibilities. So imagine each of these circles represents a different role on the team, right? Designer, data scientist, recruiter,
Product manager, user researcher, content strategist, all the roles.
totally. So you can figure out where stuff intersects and where stuff is distinct. So here's an example Venn diagram that I created at Meetup to help clarify responsibilities between 3 common roles on any product team, right? A product manager, an engineering manager, and your tech lead. It's intentional that there's overlaps between these circles. Think about what responsibilities might go in the overlapping bits and what responsibilities might go in the distinct bits, because it's important to nail down where all of those responsibilities sit so you can have an honest conversation and gain that shared understanding, not just between these 3 roles and these 3 people, but between everybody who needs to work with them so they actually know who they need to go to talk to for what thing. So in this example, we went and filled in what responsibilities each role on that team has, and then we began to sketch out what was in the overlaps. So here, the tech lead and the product manager are going to work together to scope out and estimate project work. Documenting this Venn diagram and adding it to a wiki can totally help in the future when there's conflict or confusion about who should be doing what, because you can update it as things change and refer back to it when someone new joins. You could even take it further. Sometimes being super prescriptive is beneficial. So we're laughing because Deepa made this, and there's 16 permutations of intersections across this 4-way Venn diagram, right? Product designer, business strategist, product manager, and data scientist. You might look at this and think it's maybe overkill, but believe me, it helps. 80% of the time, there's agreement on what each of these roles is expected to bring to the table and how people can partner to make it happen. Building out a diagram like this with your teams is super helpful for that 20% of the time when stuff just isn't happening.
Totally.
Either because someone doesn't know it's their responsibility or when no one just wants to do it. After utilizing these Venn diagrams to better clarify functional roles and having team members take this back to their feature teams or squads to discuss it and ratify it, we quickly saw higher velocity and more accountability. Feature teams knew how to operate and what was expected of each member, and the little pockets of overlap was where we witnessed real magic happening and innovation happening.
Okay, next tactic. So the value of adding and creating and defining living product documents and processes. So what do I mean by this? Well, I mean the product processes and the written documents that keep your product development train on the tracks. By living, I'm trying to call attention to the fact that these processes need to be tended to and updated almost carefully and intentionally like a living creature, especially as your organization hits inflection points like it doubles in size or maybe it acquires another company or establishes a remote team. So documenting product processes is valuable on many fronts. First, the act of documenting actually fosters all the necessary debate and discussion and buy-in to actually standardize the product process. And so by doing this, you avoid reinventing the wheel, duplicating efforts, or having unnecessary disagreement. I can't tell you how many times I've seen team members basically change squads within their organization and have to completely learn new processes. That is such a waste of time and a waste of energy. You really should have almost like a lingua franca, a sort of standardized, defined process that as people move between teams, they can utilize without having to relearn anything. Similarly, when product documents like specifications or research, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, is not written down and easily accessible for everyone in their organization, people start arguing from the gut, and in some cases will represent, assumptions or invalid facts, and that's just not a good thing. So you really want to not waste all that energy to detangle all that disagreement, but write things down and make these documents accessible so that people can start sharing them and they're working from the same foundation. So to avoid all of this, I think it's critically necessary to determine the key documents, meetings, and milestones that will keep everyone aligned and moving forward in a committed way. Basically, you own your product development workflow, so use it to your benefit. Use it to establish good habits, and use it to create the company culture that you want. So in fact, you can use your product process to negate maybe bad things about your company culture. Maybe there's a tendency to not write things down. Well, then you can standardize on a few required documents, and you're disciplined about writing those documents out, and that can increase the paper trail and allow sharing and remembering of key decisions. Or maybe your product team just doesn't do a good enough job of iterating on product releases. So you work really hard and you get a V1 out the door, and then there's never a V2 or a V3. I call this MVP-itis. So what I've done to tackle that is I standardize into the product development workflow a specific milestone and phase dedicated to understanding how ship features are performing and deciding what to do next. So basically, listen up. If you've ever wanted a crash course in how to tackle product or feature development cross-organizationally from the lens of alignment and transparency and confident commitment, just give me your brains for the next 5 minutes. No need to go down some sort of Google rabbit hole. I'll cover the phases of product development that we talked about earlier and highlight the documents, the meetings, and the milestones that you should consider having part of your process. So remember, we've already kind of defined what the discovery phase is. That's where we're framing the problem, the opportunity, and the approach. So what are some documents that are valuable here? Well, many organizations use something called a narrative doc. You might also call it a spec or a PRD. The language can kind of change. But this is that critical document where the goals, the non-goals, requirements, use cases, success metrics, all of that is defined and laid out for everyone to read. So my tip here is to create a template for this document. The product leader or the product team should create a template and really use a critical eye to determine what's required and what's optional. Because you really want to make sure that the most required critical sections are there and everyone's filling them out regardless. As for meetings in the discovery phase, I really like to do a feature kickoff. That's basically where everyone who cares about the project, is a stakeholder, has an opinion, comes together to share their point of view. This can be really helpful for a product manager to kind of understand where there's agreement and where there's disagreement so that they can leave that room and be armed with that information to have those conversations and try to gain that alignment. As for milestones, I always call out when the discovery phase is complete. That's the milestone where everyone in the organization understands when they hear discovery complete, problem definition and supporting explorations are done. And so this means we're now moving into the design phase. And for lack of a better phrase, kind of pointing out, hey, no backsies. We've gotten some agreement here. We're moving forward. So at this point, or after this point, if stakeholders give late feedback, they risk it not being considered. The next phase is when, based on the problem that we defined in discovery, we're now going to start ideating on design solutions. So a critical document I like mandating here is a design brief, which clearly explains the design choices that are being explored and then committed to based on the problem being solved. Essentially justifying, or maybe a better word is actually validating the design choices from the lens of how it solves the problem that we had just defined in the discovery phase. As for meetings, I love doing something called a product review, and there's many different flavors of that out there. But this is basically as the designs come together and are essentially baked, pretty much ready for development, you circle back with stakeholders, leadership, and the leads on the product team working on this to review together and to make sure that the problem that we defined in discovery is accurately being addressed, everyone is aware of what we're trying to build, and bought in. And then lastly, a good milestone is the design complete milestone. And similar to discovery complete, this is sort of where we're saying, hey, we're moving forward to development, no backsies. Okay, now we move into the development phase where the feature is actually being built. And so critical documents could include a technical plan, which lays out the technical considerations and basically the overall plan of attack from engineering's perspective. This is a helpful document that's created by engineering, and it's really useful to gain buy-in across members of the engineering team, or in general to educate folks about what is going to happen and why. I like having architecture reviews, especially for larger projects. I often make it required for larger projects, especially V1s. And this is used to sort of engender buy-in, broadly discuss the justifications of specific technical choices. There are actually a lot of really great articles out there about how to set up architecture review meetings in an inclusive and helpful way. Whether you're a large company like Google or a small startup, there's a lot of good stuff out there, especially around how to do this with remote teams. I also like to require calling out the code complete milestone, and this is where, again, we're indicating to the entire company, hey, the bulk of this thing has been developed, we're now moving into testing, and so this thing is going to go out very soon. So as we move into testing and shipping, some of the critical documents for this phase include writing down the test plan, so important. Think of down the line when people are like, wait, are we supported on that browser? Well, these types of documents can answer those questions in just a hot second. And really calling out the test complete milestone as well. And as for deployment, I always ask my PMs to write deployment plans. These are documents that clearly call out how the feature is going out the door, who is going to access it, and it really reiterates the success metrics that will define how this feature is performing, and how are we going to track the progress against those metrics. And then a meeting that I find really useful to, again, get everyone on the same page and alignment is to review that deployment plan together in a pre-deployment sync meeting. I especially like this when there are other teams and people in the organization, like customer support or sales, who need to be looped in. I absolutely hate it when someone on sales is maybe surprised that a feature is going out the door and one of their high-touch customers is going to see it. It's like, hey, we talked about this. So it's really, you want to get people together to gain that alignment and make sure that you're all on the same page, and the pre-deployment sync can be very valuable there. And once the feature is out the door, even if it's just to a small fraction of users as a test versus like 100% available to all users, you should make it clear with the shipped milestone. This is also a moment to celebrate. I love doing release notes with GIFs to sort of show the flow, exactly how it's going to look. And this is a shipped milestone. So yay, we did it. But the next phase is actually my absolute favorite phase, and I think it's so important and necessary at so many different companies, and this is the post-deployment and iteration phase. So too often, organizations don't have this phase, and so I like to codify it into their product development process. Basically, in this phase, as a team, you're evaluating how is the product performing in the wild and determining whether it's actually doing what you had wanted it to do based on what you defined in the discovery phase. And then here's where you're really deciding, okay, what next? Are we going to do a follow-on V2 version? Are we going to kill it? Are we going to maybe change it and pivot it in some different way? You need to have that conversation. So when my product teams announce to the company in that earlier phase the shipped milestone, I always ask my product managers to basically say in the email or the Slack announcement saying that it's shipped, when are they going to come back with more information about how the product is performing? By kind of building that muscle memory where people expect to hear when that's going to happen, they then feel committed that they will actually get an update on the impact of that feature. The impact is then preserved in a post-ship document, which is a feature update document. So sometimes you also need to have a post-ship sync meeting where the stakeholders and the feature teams all come together to actually talk about that impact and gain that alignment. They want to ask questions, they want to debate. So that's really important to have, and I like to do that with that post-ship sync meeting. And if your organization doesn't do enough reporting back on impact or iterating on shipped products, this phase can be super duper valuable. So basically, I encourage all of you to go back to your product teams and product leadership after this conference and reevaluate your product-driven development workflow, specifically with a critical eye towards the meetings, documents, and milestones that will help make your product development smoother. Remember to use your product process to benefit you and your company. It doesn't have to be heavy-handed. It can be very complementary to your culture, or it can actually be the thing to catalyze some change within your company culture. Basically, you own your product process, so use it to your benefit.
All right, who here has been avoiding having a really tough conversation at work? Show of hands. So you can admit it, it's a safe space. Yeah. Who recently has delivered hard-to-hear feedback to someone at work? Kudos. Oh, thank you. Oh, this makes me so happy. It's hard, though, right? Lots of us actively avoid having those difficult conversations that, honestly, is 99% of the time what's necessary to unblock a team. So why do we have such a hard time having these conversations? This is the amygdala. So the amygdala's job is to be constantly on the lookout for stuff in our environment that it categorizes as either a threat or a reward. Its job is not to be rational, and it's not to be logical. The amygdala's job is to tell the rational and logical part of our brain right up here in the front to go to sleep when we see a bear headed towards us. Our amygdala is what's helped us survive for millennia. Because as humans, basically we need our amygdala to react really, really fast. We can't rely on those logical, rational parts of our brain to kind of process the information. So this little cutie is responsible for all of the surprising human emotions that come up in us, right? It comes up in our teammates, it comes up in our managers when we have to have these difficult conversations. I'm going to be talking a lot more about this in my management workshop tomorrow, but I want to underscore this now. The amygdala is freaked out by a lot more than just bears. Our amygdala can get hijacked or kick into high gear when we need to have difficult conversation with someone else, when we're receiving feedback, when we recognize that we're causing someone else to freak out, when we feel like we're not part of the cool kids crew anymore. Our amygdalas, though, love this stuff, right? It helps them chill out. If you feel like you have that sense of belonging to a group, a sense of progress towards a goal, the feeling of choice or autonomy, a feeling of equality or fairness, or that predictability stuff, right? It helps our brains just like, oh, all right, I feel better. I don't have to have this surprising level of human emotions. So think about these things when you need to start having those difficult conversations. Because the typical workplace does not have a model for how to have these hard conversations, right? Especially to have them in a way that doesn't freak out our amygdalas. So it's really hard to know how to get started or to even feel encouraged that it's going to make your situation feel better after you have that conversation. And our amygdalas the whole time are going like, run away, don't have this conversation. So the first thing I like to institute to help with this is ground rules for meetings, even if they're not in meetings in which things are going to get particularly dicey or emotional. Research shows that all human groups use rules of engagement to make something that can be very unpredictable, humans and human conversations are very unpredictable, they can make them feel a little bit more predictable. And we know that our brains love a little bit of predictability. Most of the ground rules that we have in our conversations every day are implicit, like don't interrupt someone while they're talking, right? So as Paloma Medina writes in her Ground Rules 101, ground rules don't have to be stuffy. They don't have to be stiff. They should not be overly cutesy or gimmicky. They don't have to like spell an acronym out. But they do have to be shortish so that our brains can remember it, like stay curious, which I use all the time after learning it from her. Anyone who's worked with me will have seen some of these used, right? Stay curious. Everyone is smart and trying. No open phones or laptops. Vegas rules. What happens in this meeting stays in this meeting. Some ground rules are crucial before you start having those conversations, right? Even if it's in a one-on-one. Another common thing I see in organizations is that people are reluctant to talk to other leaders about their dilemma.
Yep.
Often, really strong leaders don't want to appear as if they're like ratting someone out to their partner or like coloring someone else's opinion of that person.
Yep.
So they avoid talking about their difficult conversation because it might threaten that sense of belonging to the larger group. So when I had to first fire someone at my job years and years and years ago, I met routinely with a group of other managers to kind of get some training and support from each other. And for a long time, I didn't mention it to that crew, even though we were explicitly there to be supporting each other. But when I finally did, I finally was like, oh, my manager isn't really supporting me through this. I'm not really sure what I'm doing. That group came together. They helped like actually have me practice the conversations. They gave me supporting advice. They helped me feel like it was the right decision. The most thing they did, though, was do that practice of like role-playing that difficult conversation with me. Practicing those difficult conversations is honestly incredibly helpful. It gives the person who needs to lead the conversation a safe place to practice the words that they're going to say and to start to feel how it feels in your body to say those words out loud. It gives you an opportunity for the other person to practice freaking out at you so you can have some experience knowing what it feels like if someone like wants to punch you in the face or burst into tears. It's so much less scary when you finally have to have the conversation because you've had some practice and you know what it's going to feel like. The other magical part of this is that when you do this practice in a group setting, you get to learn how other people approach things differently. I have learned so much from watching a variety of managers practice how to have the same exact conversation because I learned about active listening and reflecting and different impactful word choices and the power of silence and so much more. So one of my favorite ways to tackle this is to create an environment in which I give leads the opportunity to role play having these difficult conversations. And I'll participate too, so that folks can see a model of a variety of ways to handle a sticky situation. Sometimes I hand out little scripts so people can practice stuff that's actually not real life and like not so intense. Like I'll hand one person the role of a manager who needs to tell a direct report that they're not getting a promotion. Or I'll hand someone the practice role of an individual contributor who just got a competing job offer and wants to try to negotiate for a salary, so that manager can have the practice of having that conversation. But I encourage everyone, especially people who aren't managers, to create and participate in these practice sessions. You and your coworkers will level up so quickly. Still, having everyone as leads handle those difficult conversations themselves, it won't solve all your problems. Find yourself someone internal who can act as a facilitator of these conversations, who doesn't have a stake in the outcome. It probably won't be someone in HR because that can introduce a power dynamic that can be less than helpful, but maybe someone in your company has training or experience being an objective facilitator of resolving critical conversations. Loop them in or get trained yourself. There's a ton of online and in-person training on conflict resolution out there.
Okay, moving along. The next tactic, the value of being mindful when you, your teams, your leaders, really anyone in your organization is going to communicate. So this statement, it's like a little blunt, but I sincerely believe it deep down in my heart. Poor communication will dilute impact, frustrate employees, and result in failure. Basically, the act of leading is primarily centered around communication, whether you're communicating vision or strategy, plans, intentions, maybe you're communicating good news or bad news, everything is communication. And teams that practice mindful communications have higher impact, higher morale, and better collaboration. But by rolling out mindful communication practices in your organization, you can have magic.
Think about listening and speaking with compassion, kindness, and awareness. Communicating this way does a magical thing where it opens up people's brains to be more receptive and calmer, right? It chills out all of our amygdala. So this originally came from Etsy, where the culture and engagement team developed this charter of mindful communication. It's all right, and roll it out. They even made this cute little video to go with it. So here's the screenshot from it. I have used this in so many workplaces since then. Anytime I need to set some expectations about how some people should be interacting with each other and respecting each other, I roll out some of these points. So I'm going to walk through them real fast, but there's a blog post that I posted about this. You can all find this online and totally steal it. So the first rule of thumb here is be mindful of your audience. Consider who's in the room, how they might receive this information, and what's at stake for them. Maybe someone is feeling like this conversation is super high stakes, or the conversation is about a topic that is super duper important to them. Being mindful of your audience means understanding how each person might be hearing and digesting what's happening. Be aware of your medium, like your tone of voice, your choice of wording, and your body language. You may not realize that being very efficient with your words could come across to someone else as being frustrated or short-tempered. Your crossed arms could seem super defensive to the other person at the other end of the table. Or if you're communicating over text, that's a lossy medium where tone and emotion may be overlooked or misunderstood. Seek out ways to be inclusive with your wording so that it acknowledges everyone in the room, not just the majority. Consider how these power dynamics of the group you're communicating with, right? They're pervasive and exist even where we wish they didn't. Like maybe someone's in the room who has the ability to fire someone else. Or maybe you're a stakeholder with lots of power and you don't realize how influential your words can be. These are good power dynamics to keep in the front of your mind as you communicate. And when you are making an ask of someone else, first ask yourself, is this person in a position to take the action that I'm suggesting? Are we coming from different places? Or how might I acknowledge the discrepancy? Because they might be really frustrated or confused if you're just venting or unloading on them about something that they really can't influence or do anything about.
Yeah, that can be frustrating. Next, make sure what you bring to the conversation actually elevates it. This is one of the things that's hardest to remember when you're in an amygdala hijacked place like Lara was talking about. So as you think about what to say next, remember to be constructive and productive. Aim to make something better to get shared results rather than tear it down. One way to elevate the conversation is to meet transparency with responsibility. I've seen a lot of really poorly constructed feedback shared in an anonymous format, and this doesn't help anyone do a better job. There's really a fine line between being anonymous and trolling. So before you click send on that email, imagine you're face-to-face with the person on the other end of this conversation and see if you'd still say that same thing. Honesty is not constructive if it's cruel.
Expect that everyone comes to work to do the best job that they can and make the best decisions possible given their capabilities and the information available to them. We're all playing for the same team, and we want to help our organization win. A lot of the work of assuming best intentions rests on a foundation of empathy.
Totally.
Ask yourself, what else is going on for this person? Remember that what you're seeing in real life is just the tip of the iceberg that's what's going on for them, right? There's a ton going on beneath the surface. My personal example of this is when my arthritis is flaring and I'm traveling on the New York City subway. Unless I'm using a cane that day, no one could tell that I need a seat, right? You can practice empathy by asking open questions and getting curious. And also you can practice empathy by making it okay for the other person to not share more information with you, right? Sometimes all you need is a little clue to remind you, hey, there's probably something else going on for this person. So let me go back to assuming best intentions and remembering that we're all playing for the same team.
Okay, listen to learn. Basically, stay genuinely curious. This is often the hardest one, but your goal is to build an understanding about someone's behavior and not make judgments or accusations. Recognize that others have an expertise and a context that you may not. And so really it helps to prepare to be surprised when you walk into a room. Operate under the assumption that you don't know the whole story, and so be open to multiple perspectives and underlying factors that could make something less straightforward than it may first appear. So be willing to have your mind changed. Actually, be excited to have your mind changed. Few things are more awesome than being surrounded by people who know a lot more about something than you do, because you get to learn, you get to grow, and that's really kind of what we're here to do.
Magic.
Exactly.
You can totally steal these when you go back to work. Again, I've got a blog post up, so feel free to just copy it and paste it and incorporate into your workplace.
Steal them, share them with your teams.
Oh, totally.
Really emulate them. It's very valuable. Okay, our last insight, the power of joining forces. I actually learned this lesson with this one over here. And so we're both really happy to be here to talk about this because it was really an amazing sort of lesson that happened to the both of us. So the reality is that disjointed things happen when teams are siloed. I mean disjointed decisions, disjointed strategies, disjointed efforts. And instead of being disjointed, if leadership joined together and coordinated together, you will immediately see higher levels of trust, coordination, and synchronicity across all your teams. And this basically all adds up to having healthier and more impactful companies. So here are some tactical ways that Lara and I have joined together when we were leading our individual teams on a shared strategy and vision. Firstly, we have led a lot of cross-organizational meetings, whether they were meetings for strategic updates, broad check-ins, major announcements. We did these things together, which meant that product, design, engineering, and data science teams were all brought together for us to share important news. Being in the same space together, virtually over Google Hangouts or in an actual physical room, fosters a sense of collaboration and in-it-togetherness. And look at our chemistry together. We love each other, we respect each other, and we know that showing up together in the same room would communicate an even more important message. But even if you don't love your product partner or engineering partner, that's okay. Still, just try to, co-lead cross-organizational meetings together. It'll take work, it'll take intention, it'll take coordination, but I promise it will pay off. So to strengthen these cross-org meetings that we ran, we did other things together, like public Q&As. We basically call them office hours, where Lara and I would be together and field questions from the entire product organization.
Just like this, actually, right
now. Engineering, design, product management, data science, all of them together. We asked someone else to take notes and field questions from remote employees so that we could focus entirely on our message, our energy, and how we were showing up in the room. And so these office hours, these Q&A sessions were naturally sometimes raw and intense because of the very direct questions that folks have, but we didn't shy away from that. We're leaders, which means it's important to be able to navigate those situations. And it showed how ready we were to be a united front on behalf of our teams. We were able to radiate strength and intention and vulnerability together, which really strengthened that message. Additionally, we jointly authored meeting agendas where it wasn't just open Q&A. And folks saw that we were partnering together on these meetings, and then the expectation was that they partner themselves within their own functional teams and cross-functionally as well. Basically, we aimed to be the behavior that we wanted to see happen across the company. We shadowed each other's strategic meetings too to make sure that we stayed up to date on what each other was talking about with their teams and had that shared context.
Similarly, we wrote a lot of cross-organizational emails. A lot of emails. So anytime we needed to roll out something big together, a pivot to the roadmap, an update on a skills matrix, really anything that was going to impact more than just one team, we wrote these together and signed them together, right? A little Lara plus Deepa or Deepa plus Lara. We were presenting a united and collaborative front, and it showed that we spent time and intention to get on the same page and be aligned. Again, those are signals that foster confidence throughout our teams. A common failure mode that I'm sure you've all experienced is like little drips of information you hear in pockets and like maybe through the grapevine. It's the worst, right? When you feel like you're not all getting information all at the same time. This feels terrible. We both love communication plans, and I learned the term TikTok doc from Deepa.
I learned that on the campaign.
Nice. So we wrote TikTok docs that list out the different steps of sharing information, and we would collaborate on when those things were happening, in what medium, and kind of who would be the person to do it. It helped us know who was going to be responsible for sending an email or talking points or speaking in an all-hands meeting, and we were intentional about who said what and when and to which groups. It made our jobs so much more straightforward, and it meant that our teams had a much better experience. Relatedly, there was a terrible inclusion issue that happened at a different company, but it made the news while we were at Kickstarter, and so I sent an email to my engineering managers with talking points and ways to create space to talk about it in their one-on-ones with teammates if their teammates wanted to. When I told Deeps about it, she asked if I could share the same tips and information with her managers too.
Product managers, design managers as well.
Yeah, it totally made sense to share these tactics of how managers should be supporting their teammates throughout both of our organizations. Even though it was like an engineering, news-related thing, it didn't make sense to silo it.
Totally.
So as we started to share more and more context and news and tips and tricks with each other's organizations, I personally learned so much, and so did all the lead devs in my organization, because we were looped into our peer leaders' talking points and context. Even if you think that piece of information could only feel relevant or interesting to a subset of your team, go ahead and just ask your peers in other disciplines if they might want to, receive the same talking points or training or extra context too. And then, of course, we celebrated things together. So when I arrived, Deepa was the only person who sat in a retrospective and clapped and whooped in retrospectives. So I was like, yeah, yes, that demo. And so it was the two of us who really started to create that energy together.
It was so lonely before you joined.
Right? Congratulate folks together. Recognize teams and milestones together. Whoop together. It might feel cheesy, but it was so important for us to match each other's energy and really set a tone of cheerfulness and celebration for our teams.
Because our teams basically saw us coordinating, saw us holding each other accountable, we then saw the halo effect in our teams together. We started seeing stronger collaboration and communication across all disciplines.
The level of honesty and candid conversation that we shared resulted in the beginnings of healthier collaboration in our teams. People started cracking open the sticky subjects. They started revisiting their unchecked assumptions. People started discussing stuff that had gone unchanged for years. Our honesty and candidness started to breed more and more trust and accountability.
So we want to ask all of you, how can you develop that with your own peer leaders back in your organizations? Cross-functional leadership success means cross-functional all-around success. So join forces with your own peer leaders, and you'll be thrilled with what comes out of it, and maybe you'll have this type of partnership, which can be really valuable and satisfying.
So please, take this back to your teams. Be the catalyst of change by using these insights. We've already tweeted these slides. Just rip them wholesale for your organizations. Product organizations, infrastructure organizations, truly any discipline. We promise this stuff works, and your organization will be revitalized because of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great conference.